Right. Rhetorical question. I want you to switch it around in your head. Why do you think that people fall out of love?
That's not a thing.
It's kind of sad, isn't it? Why do you, just think about it, because it happens. Or maybe you could argue they were never in love in the first place. But why do relationships end, I guess is what I'm asking, right? Whether it be a married couple, whether it be a friendship that just seems to kind of end, whether it's something in your family that it starts out, because you guys are a family, and then before you know it, kind of just dissipates into awkwardness. We have those things in our lives. And some of you might have divorced parents, and you've seen it firsthand. You've seen it go down. You've seen awkwardness and dysfunction. Maybe it's something as simple as you had a friend in high school, and before you know it, you guys just aren't anymore, and it's weird, and it's awkward. And I guess the reason I'm saying this is kind of coming to the conclusion that humans just kind of suck sometimes. We do. And I'm not saying that it's always intentional. I'm not saying that we intentionally hurt each other, but I'm not saying it's malicious, but in most instances, I don't think your parents truly intend to hurt you. And no married couple gets married and then sets off to get divorced. That's never a plan when they get married. That's never marked on the calendar during the honeymoon, hopefully. In the same way, no friendship ever starts with the thoughts of, okay, we're going to be besties for 6 months, and then after that, our friendship is going to dissipate into a cloud of awkwardness, and we are going to sit on opposite ends of the lunch table the rest of the semester and not make eye contact. That's not something that's ever planned. That's not something that we desire in a relationship. Now, I can't speak to every single one of your lives, and I think every situation is different. I'm not claiming to know where you're at or where you're coming from. But in a lot of cases, what happens when you have a relationship end is you have people from both sides of the relationship lose sight of what's important. They let the big things become little things. They make the little things into big things, and the results are ugly. So here's another question for you guys. If Christianity is a relationship, then what happens when we apply that same brokenness that we can bring into our earthly relationships, where we lose sight of what's important? What happens when we apply it to our relationship with God? That's what we're going to explore tonight. So just as a recap, week 1, we talked about truth, right? There's absolute truth. What God said is, and we believe it, and we're going to accept it all, or we're going to toss all of it. Week 2, we talked about God's plan. We talked about what that truth is. We talked about that Jesus came, and when he came, he made a way for us to be loved as if we were perfect, even though we're not, and we're sinners. And week 3, tonight, what we're going to talk about is how do we handle that truth? Now that we've covered the crazy concepts of universal truth, inherent evil, cosmic love, forgiveness, how the heck are you and I supposed to fit into all of it? The cool thing about the Bible is the people in that book are going through the exact same stuff that we are today. So we're going to take a look at a chunk out of Galatians. It's one of my favorite chunks of Scripture, so I was looking for an excuse to use it anyway. Check this out. Galatians 3:1-4. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Paul spit and fire. Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Just one thing. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, you are now trying to finish by means of the flesh. So what we have here is Paul talking to a group of Galatians, that's people from Galatia, and rebuking them because they've lost their way. They've lost sight of what's important. They've lost the relational aspects of their Christianity. So starting in verse 1, Paul's already after these guys. He's calling them foolish. He's saying, you foolish Galatians, in front of you, before your very eyes, you saw Christ crucified. Basically what he's saying is the most important thing that's ever happened in the universe ever, bigger than the release of the iPhone or those new Snapchat updates that you touch your face twice, and you open it, your face becomes a vampire. That's sweet. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than Yogurt Lab, those self-serve yoga bars that are out now. Oh, me and Carly go to Yogurt Lab probably 4 times a week. It's shameful. Oh, I love it. It's bigger than that. This is the single most important cataclysmic thing that's ever happened to you. Paul is pretty much saying, hey, dummies, the most important thing that's ever happened in all of history is surrounded around, happened right in front of your faces. You saw it. You saw it happen. The destiny of the entire human race has been forever changed, and you saw it. But he's playing these Galatians because in verse 2 he goes, I'd like to learn just one thing from you. And when he says that, there's some bite on it. There's some sass. The hip is cocked out. He's being sarcastic because Paul is the expert on all things Jesus. So Paul is telling these people to tell him something is like me asking Katie if he wants some pointers on his three-point shot.
Who's Katie?
Sorry, Kevin Durant. Or like Kobe Bryant. Basically what he's saying is, you guys don't know, I need to teach you something. He's being sarcastic to make a very serious point, and he follows up with yet another sarcastic question. He says, did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by believing what you heard? Why are you saved? Is it because of the good works that you're doing, or is it because of what Jesus did? Now, we know the answer to that, and as we frame it, it's a pretty simple question, but Paul is trying to make a point as to the way these people are living. And I think, but here's the thing, I know that sitting here, we know the answer to that question. But just because you know it's in your head does not mean that you believe it in your heart or you walk it out with your feet. See, our discipleship pastor here, his name is John Reiner, and the man is brilliant, and I've shamelessly stolen several things from him for tonight. And a thing that he often references is this thing called the equation. And the equation is something that so many of people who grow up in the church live enslaved by. And this is what the equation is. Are you ready? Value equals productivity. What I do or what I physically accomplish equals how much I matter or am loved by God. Like, if I cheated on a test last week, God loves me less or feels less passionately or less loving towards me than he did when I didn't cheat on it 2 weeks ago. I've never smoked pot, so God must love me more, be more affectionate towards me than people who do smoke pot. That's the equation. That's equational thinking. We don't say it out loud, but we can feel it. We can feel like we're only worth to God how well we can perform for God. Something as simple as, God probably isn't that crazy about me because last night I fooled around with my boyfriend or my girlfriend again, or I watched porn, or I cheated on the test, or it doesn't even really pay for me to pray right now. Why? Because he's not even going to listen, because last night I went and did that thing again, whatever it is. I gave into an eating disorder. I lied to my parents. I hurt myself. Fill in the blank. Pick your flavor. Whatever it is that haunts you or enslaves you, that thing, we can think that whether or not we give into that thing can affect the way that God feels about us. And we just need to address the fact that that line of thinking, that equation, is just garbage. Like, that's something we need to address. That line of thinking is garbage. Bless you. And I quote John Reiner again, because he's a brilliant man. He says, your value is in who God is and who God has called you to be. Your value is in who God is and who God has called you to be. And the reason that's cool is because who God is never changes. And who God has called you to be never changes. Now, I'm not any good at math, but as long as we're working with equations, if who God is never changes, and God's plans for you or who he's called you to be has never changed, then we can safely deduce that how God feels about you, his affection for you, it what? Never changes. You guys are sharp. Look at these guys, front row, head of the class. Exactly, it never changes. Now, Romans 5, 8 through 11 says this. I want to go through this really quick. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now, that verse right there is one of the most famous verses in the Bible, and it's 100% true. 100% true. But what happens so often is we forget the verses that come after. And they're just as important. 9 through 11. Since we have been justified by his blood, how much more should we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled through the death of his son, how much more, having been reconciled, should we be saved through his life? So let me ask you this. Now, if I'm doing my life right, if I'm doing my relationship with Carly right, should I love her more right now, or should I love her more in 10 years of marriage?
10 years of marriage.
10 years of marriage. In the same way, think about it. At one point, your mom was pregnant with you. And when she was pregnant with you, both your parents loved you. They didn't even know you yet. How much more do they love you now that you've been in the world, that they know your name? Some of you are like, but in all honesty, how much more do they, now they know your name, they know your face, they know your favorite color, right? They've experienced you. You're part of the family. Why is it, though, that we as Christians say yes to Jesus because we believe that he has this insane, crazy love for us, but then after we've been grinding for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, however long, we forget. We just forget. We lose sight of what's important. It's like any relationship, right? After a couple months, we forget. We forget the insanity of what he meant when he died on the cross. We forget the depths of his love. And soon Christianity becomes a list of things that we have to do. Because we're just kind of think God's pissed off all the time. We kind of reduce God to that angry middle school librarian who just pretended to read behind the desk and stared at you and waited for you to whisper a little bit too loud so she could yell at you. God's not like that. Basically, we live, sometimes we as Christians, people who've grown up in the church, we can live like God loved us more or liked us better when we were sinners. We talk about like when I was a sinner, Jesus came and he loved me and he wanted to take me out of my sin. But now that I'm a Christian, I've been a Christian for 5 years, God just really doesn't want me to drink. How much more now that you're part of his family? That's just a concept that's so lost on us sometimes. We really, like I've done this and that's why it's so sick to me because I've done it. I've been in college. I'm still in college, kind of. And I've had people come up to me and say, Max, why don't you drink? And I would be like, I don't drink because I'm a Christian and Jesus saved me and I guess I don't drink. That's awful, right? That's terrible, but that's the way I thought of it because in my mind, God was just a person that I was trying to appease. And as Christians, we can get it so backwards. We can fall into the same trap as people who get divorced, or as people whose friendships fall apart, or family relationships fall apart. We lose sight of what's important. We can reduce our Christian faith to just a bunch of religious tasks that we're doing. That's what Paul's talking about. He's talking about works of the flesh. It's simply your Christianity, your faith is summarized by, I go to church. I'm at youth group. I read my Bible. I don't drink. And I'm not saying that those are bad things. Those are good things to be doing. But we make those things be how we see God values us. So then what happens is when we mess up, when our performance falls, and you're a human, you're a sinner, so it will fall at some point, then we think that God's value of us drops with it. Guys, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that God loved or liked you more while you were a sinner. He was crazy enough to die for you while you were a sinner. Basically, right now, as you're part of his family, he's losing his mind with affection for you. Nothing you do or say can make God love you more or less. Your value to God is constant. He thinks you are worth everything all the time. We just need to change our way of thinking. Because this is what the world is like. The world is all about what you do, how much you make, how tall you are, how pretty you are, how smart you are. And that's where we see kind of the root of that equation. What you can give is how much you matter. If you're good at sports, you can be a jock and you can get a scholarship and you can be popular. I'm not saying sports are bad. Or if you're pretty or you're really smart, you can get a scholarship or do all these things. To the world, you're kind of like a car. Once you drive a car off the lot, that bad boy's losing value. And as you guys get older and wrinklier and slower and lose bladder control, to the world, you are less valuable.
What?
To the world.
Well, how is...
To God, you want to know what you're like to God? To God, you're like an antique firearm. Yeah, like an antique firearm. Google it. Like a Revolutionary War musket. I Googled it. People with a ton of money, you can invest in like a musket or something. You buy one of those bad boys, those things hold their value on the counter. Okay, that's kind of a weird example. Like that. You're like a work of art. Not to be cheesy, you're like a work of art. You're like a masterpiece. Think of it like this. Like if you were just a car to God, God would hop in, he'd drive you around, and then he'd upgrade to the next model when the 2015s or 2016s came out. But that's not how he views you. You're a masterpiece. Like, who knows, like Van Gogh, right?
Who's that?
Van Gogh's a famous artist. Thank you for asking, Nate Spakeen.
Hey, what's his first name?
Van Gogh. Vincent Van Gogh. Come on, dude.
Even you didn't know it.
Pablo Picasso. That's what you're like to God. So think about it like this. We get into this place where we've been walking through this walk of Christianity for however many years, and we just feel like God's kind of bored with us, and he's just tolerating us, and he's sitting us, and he's looking at the world, and he's looking at us like, why aren't you doing enough? Why aren't you maturing faster? Why can't you stop? Why can't you screw up less? That's not how, guys, you're like a work of arts in his house, pad, crib, whatever you want to call it. You're a Van Gogh. Like when he sees you, he's not thinking, wow, I've had this car for forever. He's looking, guys, look at this masterpiece I have. He enjoys beholding it. He's sitting there and he goes, wow, I can't believe that's mine. But we don't think about it like that. We think about it like, well, God's interested in the people that he's saving, and he is interested in the people he's saving, and he loves to save sinners, but you are so valuable to him as a part of his family. And so often we forget that, and it just becomes like another thing that we check off on a box. Yep, I'm a Christian. You're a Van Gogh. When God walks through the halls of his house with his buddies, he makes his friends stop to stare and goes, this is mine. And he knows the date that he got it. And he says, and it's been sweeter and sweeter every single day. And I know that's cheesy, and I know that's a little bit, yeah.
What if it hasn't been sweeter and sweeter?
If it's sour.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, okay.
Then does it still say-
If you've been struggling personally
Yeah.
in your relationship with God,
Yeah, then where does he say his friends?
that's a great question. And that's kind of the whole point of what we're talking about, guys, though. Nate just asked, what happens if I'm not doing enough? What if I'm screwing up? What if I'm making mistakes? We just found out that that's the equation right there. That's that line of thinking, like, I'm not doing enough for God to look at me on the wall and go, that thing's beautiful. And here's the thing, you don't have to do anything, because where does your value lie? In who God is. It doesn't change. And the way that God looks at you on that wall in his house never, ever changes. Regardless of the mistakes you make, the long nights you had, the person that you yelled at, the thing you did. You are viewed as a treasure to God. It doesn't change. And so often we get into this place where, one, we think God's just disgusted with us and grossed out with us and wishing that we would do more. Or we just think that he's bored. Or worse yet, we get bored with the whole concept and we forget that we didn't finish. Like, we didn't get saved. We're in the process of being saved. It's a process. You're in a relationship with God. I want to tell you guys a story from the Bible, from the book of John. So this is a story that my dad uses all the time. I'll try not to butcher it. So if you're wondering if the first half of my message was from John Reiner and the second half was from Shane Holden, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. But it's about Peter. It's about Peter and Jesus. And you've heard it before, but I just think it's perfect, and I want to share it with you guys. So you got Peter and Jesus. And Jesus looks at Peter and he says, hey, Pete, you're going to deny me 3 times. You're going to have 3 times to be fam. You're going to have 3 times to have my back. And each of the 3 times, you're going to blow it. And Peter says, not me. Jesus, not me. One of the weaker disciples, maybe. Maybe that John guy who's always hugging you, but not me. I'm Peter. I don't understand. The rock. So a day goes by, and Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And in that moment, it's too much for Peter. Right? Peter blows it. Peter choked. Just like Nate said earlier, it wasn't getting sweeter for Peter. It wasn't. Peter chokes. He denies God 3 times, and because he feels like his performance went down the tubes, he feels like God's value must have gone down the tubes too, and he runs away. Peter runs away from Jesus, and he goes back to his old life, and he's fishing in a boat with his buddies. So just setting the scene, Peter's sitting in his boat fishing, feeling like a loser, because he kind of is. He denied God 3 times in the flesh. And then he looks over on the shore, and there's Jesus. It's like, shoot. The other disciples are like, ooh, it's going to get real. Well, you played him. Fast forward. Peter's on the shore with Jesus. Now we have to explore 2 words here, quick. 2 words in the Greek. I'm sure many of you heard this before, just bear with me. One word is agape, say agape. The other word is phileo, say phileo. Agape means deep, unconditional, passionate love. Phileo means you really, really like someone, or intense fondness, like your cousin. You phileo your cousin. Like filet-o fish from McDonald's. I know you're all thinking it. Agape, intense, conditional. Like when I asked Carly to marry her, I said, or to marry me. When I asked Carly to marry her, I was like, Carly, will you marry me? I agape you. And it would have been a problem. She said, well, I phileo you. I'd have been like, girl, what? That's those 2 words, okay? So I'm going to try not to butcher it. Hopefully I get this right. I think I messed it up for service. But Jesus is sitting there, and Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter goes, yes, Jesus, I agape you. Peter asks him again, or Jesus asks him again, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says again, yes, Lord, I agape you. Jesus asks the third time, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter breaks down. And his Bible says that he was hurt because he asked the third time. And he says, Lord, you know all things. You know I only phileo you. You know all things. You know I don't agape you. You know I don't have that crazy, intense, passionate, unconditional love for you like I want to. And you know what Jesus said? He said, guess what, Peter? Now I can use you. Now we can go places, Peter, because guess what? I already knew that. I already knew that you weren't as far along as you wanted to be. I already knew that you weren't going to perform in a way that made you feel like my love was enough. You don't have to, Peter. Jesus wasn't grossed out. Jesus wasn't freaked out. He didn't panic. He knew. And that's when God really used Peter. And guys, in the same way, God knows where you're at. When we talk about works of the flesh, what we're saying is we reduce our faith, we reduce our belief to going to church, to trying not to have sex, trying not to drink, trying not to do all these things. And we think that that's what makes us saved, these works. And guys, in all actuality, they're important. Next week we're going to talk about the importance of Christian living and why we do it. But in the scope of your salvation and how God feels about you, they mean nothing. And the truth, you're just not that important. There's nothing that you do that's going to affect the way God sees you if you're covered by the blood of his son.
What?
The blood of his son.
I thought you said the bugs. I was like,
The bugs of his son. the germs of Jesus.
I'd be okay with that.
If it's got to be anybody's germs, right? It's not about what you do. Your value, I want to free you from this. I want you guys to listen to me really close. What you do does not change the way that God looks at your Van Gogh on the wall in his house. You guys need to remember that because it's going to take us, it's a journey, right? Christianity is a journey. It's an ongoing relationship. It didn't just end when you said yes. It's starting, and it's going to take so much longer and be so much harder if every time you screw up or every time you make a mistake, we have to go back to the place where we're questioning whether or not God even likes us anymore. And I know because I've spent probably a good majority of my Christian walk in that place where we make a mistake and we've got to start over and be like, do you even like me, God? Do you even like me? Can I, and slowly coming forward. We don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Guys, we make a mistake, and I'm not saying that we don't need to repent. I'm not saying that it's not serious when we sin, but you need to walk. When you make a mistake, you can walk forward to God with confidence. You can be in a season of life where that's not victorious. I'll be totally open and honest with you. I have had moments where I have made mistakes. I have been struggling with a certain area, and I've had to get up here and speak. That's hard. That's scary. Like, I remember thinking, I remember being in my office panicking, thinking, God, you're not even going to show up. God, you're not going to help me out. Why would you? I'm not performing. And being totally honest with you guys, those have been some of the most beautiful times I've had up here with you guys. And those moments where I'm not enough. And I say, God, I'm sorry. And I go up there. I'm not even well prepared. I was studying for a test before a group. And God shows up and makes it beautiful. Because it's not about your performance. It's about what he did. He loves you guys. He loves you, loves you, loves you so much. I also love you guys. I'm going to pray for you, and then you are dismissed. Dear God, thank you so much for this group. Thank you for the amazing group of Van Goghs and Picassos and works of art that are in front of me right now. Thank you that they humor me and that they are responsive. Thank you for the beautiful, beautiful plans that you have for each and every one of them and the way that you see them. I pray that you would bless their weeks. You'd bless them as they're in football practice. You'd bless them as they're at dance recitals and classrooms doing homework, and that through all of it they would remember, no matter what they do, no matter what thoughts cross their head, they would remember that you view them as works of art no matter what, and their performance has little to nothing to do with how you feel about them. Thank you so much for being good. In your name I pray, amen. Da, 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 da.